The stagecoach rattled to a stop, sending dust clouds billowing across Fort McDowell, Arizona. Ruby Dawson clutched her small valise with trembling hands, her heart hammering against her ribs as she peered through the grimy window at the rugged frontier town that would be her new home. It was 1883, and at 20 years old, she had traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met, a man who had paid for her passage from Boston to the Arizona Territory after 3 months of correspondence. The driver opened the door with a creak. "Fort McDowell, miss. Last stop." Ruby hesitated, adjusting the high collar of her dress to hide the yellowing bruises on her neck, remnants of her stepfather's farewell. Her fingers brushed against her swollen cheek, and she winced. There was no hiding that mark, nor the split in her lip. She took a deep breath, said a silent prayer, and stepped down into the harsh sunlight. The heat hit her like a physical force, so different from the cool New England spring she'd left behind. Ruby squinted, scanning the small crowd that had gathered to watch the stagecoach arrival. She was looking for Clayton Keller, the cattle rancher who had advertised for a bride in the matrimonial news. In his letters, he described himself as 30 years old, established, and of decent appearance. He'd promised her a good home and respectful treatment, more than she'd ever had with her stepfather. A tall figure stepped forward from the crowd. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but Ruby could make out a strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble. He wore a faded blue shirt under a leather vest, dusty trousers, and worn boots. A gun belt hung low on his hips. "Miss Dawson." His voice was deep with a slight drawl. Ruby nodded, suddenly unable to speak. He stepped closer, and she saw his eyes clearly for the first time, a piercing blue that widened with shock as he took in the bruising on her face. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Ruby lowered her gaze. "It's nothing, Mr. Keller, just a small accident during my journey." The man's expression hardened as he gently tilted her chin up to examine her injuries. His touch was surprisingly tender for hands so rough and calloused. "Those aren't from any accident," he said, his voice low and controlled, though she could sense the anger simmering beneath. "Those are from someone's fists." Ruby tried to pull away, embarrassed. "Please, it doesn't matter now. I'm here and it matters," he interrupted. His eyes softened as they met hers. "Those bruises you arrived with, those will be the last ones you ever have to bear. I promise you that, Miss Dawson." Ruby felt tears threatening to spill. No one had ever made such a promise to her before. "I'm Clayton Keller," he continued, taking her valise. "Welcome to Fort McDowell. My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town. Are you ready to see your new home?" Ruby nodded, suddenly speechless at the kindness in his eyes, so different from what she had expected. Perhaps the Arizona Territory would offer her something she'd never dared hope for: safety. Clayton helped Ruby into his wagon, careful not to touch her injuries. He couldn't stop glancing at the bruises marring her delicate features. She was younger than he had expected, and prettier too, despite the marks. Her chestnut hair was partially hidden under a modest bonnet, but a few wayward curls had escaped, framing a face that, even battered, showed a quiet dignity that stirred something protective in him. "We should see Doc Miller before heading to the ranch," he said as he climbed up beside her. "That's really not necessary," Ruby protested, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I insist," Clayton said firmly, flicking the reins to set the horses in motion. "It's no trouble. Doc's office is just down the street." They rode in silence through the bustling Main Street. Ruby took in the wooden buildings, the saloon with its swinging doors, the general store, and the small white church at the end of the road. It was worlds away from Boston's crowded streets and brick buildings. "It's not much," Clayton said, noticing her gaze, "but it's growing. We even got a schoolhouse last year. It looks. Ruby searched for the right word, free. Clayton gave her a curious look but didn't comment. The doctor's office was a small building with a neat sign hanging outside. Clayton helped Ruby down from the wagon and escorted her inside, where an elderly man with spectacles and a kind smile greeted them. "Clay, didn't expect to see you in town today." His smile faltered when he noticed Ruby. "And who might this young lady be?" "This is Miss Ruby Dawson," Clayton explained. My mail-order bride. She just arrived on the stage coach." The doctor's eyes widened slightly as he took in Ruby's injuries. "I see. Well, Miss Dawson, I'm Dr. Samuel Miller. Let's have a look at you." Ruby reluctantly allowed the doctor to examine her face and neck. When he asked her to remove her shawl, she hesitated, glancing at Clayton. "Perhaps Mr. Keller could wait outside," she suggested softly. Clayton immediately stepped toward the door. "Of course. I'll be right outside if you need anything." Once alone with the doctor, Ruby slowly removed her shawl and unbuttoned the top of her high-necked dress, revealing more bruising across her collarbone and shoulders. Dr. Miller's expression remained professional, but his eyes reflected concern. "How did this happen, Miss Dawson?" "My stepfather," she admitted quietly. "He wasn't pleased about my decision to come west." The doctor nodded, applying a soothing salve to her visible injuries. "These will heal in time. Any pain when you breathe, dizziness?" Ruby shook her head. "I'm stronger than I look, doctor." "I believe that," he said kindly. "You'd have to be to travel all this way alone." When they finished, Dr. Miller called Clayton back in. "She'll be fine. The bruises will fade in a week or two. I've given her some salve to help with the pain." Clayton nodded, his jaw tight. "Thank you, Doc. What do I owe you?" "Not a thing. Consider it a wedding gift," the doctor said with a gentle smile at Ruby. "Though I haven't heard any announcement about a ceremony." Clayton cleared his throat. "We haven't discussed the details yet." "Well, Reverend Phillips usually conducts services on Sundays, but I'm sure he'd be available sooner if you asked." Ruby felt heat rise to her cheeks. The reality of her situation suddenly crashed down upon her. She was expected to marry this stranger, this undeniably handsome but completely unknown man, possibly within days. "Thank you for your help, doctor," she managed to say. Outside, Clayton helped her back into the wagon. "I thought we might stop at the general store before heading to the ranch. You might need some supplies." "I don't have much money," Ruby admitted, embarrassed. "Don't worry about that," Clayton said simply. "You're my responsibility now." The word responsibility stung slightly. Is that all she was to him? Ruby wondered. At the general store, a plump woman with graying hair greeted them warmly. "Clayton Keller, haven't seen you in weeks." Her curious gaze fell on Ruby. "Mrs. Bennett, this is Miss Ruby Dawson," Clayton said. "Ruby, this is Martha Bennett. She and her husband run the best store in the territory." "Oh my," Mrs. Bennett said, noticing Ruby's injuries but tactfully not mentioning them. "Welcome to Fort McDowell, dear. Are you visiting family? Miss Dawson has come to be my wife," Clayton explained, his voice matter-of-fact but not unkind. Mrs. Bennett's eyebrows shot up. "Well, that's wonderful news. We'd all given up hope of you ever settling down, Clay." Clayton's ears reddened slightly. "We'll need some things for Miss Dawson, practical items for ranch life." As Mrs. Bennett helped Ruby select appropriate clothing, sundries, and necessities, Ruby caught fragments of their quiet conversation. "Those bruises," Mrs. Bennett began. "Happened before she got here," Clayton interrupted firmly. "And won't be happening again." Ruby pretended not to hear, but his words warmed her heart. Perhaps this arrangement wouldn't be the cold transaction she had feared. When they finished shopping, Clayton loaded their purchases into the wagon. The afternoon sun was beginning to lower in the sky as they headed out of town. It's about an hour to the ranch, Clayton explained. Are you hungry? We could have stopped for a meal in town, but the food at Molly's Cafe isn't much to speak of. I'm fine, Ruby assured him, though in truth, she hadn't eaten since early morning. Clayton seemed to sense her lie. He reached behind the seat and produced a cloth-wrapped package. I brought some bread and cheese, just in case, and there's a canteen of water. Ruby accepted the simple meal gratefully. As they traveled, the town gave way to open country, vast expanses of rugged terrain dotted with cacti and scrub brush, with mountains rising in the distance. It's beautiful, Ruby said softly. Different from anything I've seen before. Clayton glanced at her. It can be harsh, but there's something honest about it. The land doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. They fell into a comfortable silence as the wagon rumbled along the rutted trail. Ruby found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. His profile was strong, his gaze steady on the horizon. There was a solidity to him that made her feel strangely safe despite barely knowing him. Mr. Keller, she began hesitantly. Clayton, he corrected. Or Clay, if you prefer. Seems odd for my wife to call me Mr. Keller. I'm not your wife yet, Ruby pointed out. A slight smile tugged at his lips. Fair enough. What were you going to say? Ruby took a deep breath. I wanted to thank you for your kindness today and for not asking too many questions. There'll be time enough for questions, he said. But I want you to know something, Miss Dawson. Ruby, she interrupted. If I'm to call you Clayton, then you should call me Ruby, he nodded. Ruby, I want you to know that whatever happened before, whatever drove you to answer an advertisement from a stranger in a newspaper, it's in the past now. I meant what I said earlier. No one will hurt you here. Why did you advertise for a bride? Ruby asked suddenly. A man like you, I mean, you seem capable and not unpleasant to look at. She blushed furiously at her own boldness. Clayton's laugh was unexpected, a deep, rich sound that transformed his serious face. Not unpleasant to look at. That might be the most lukewarm compliment I've ever received. Ruby couldn't help smiling, though it hurt her split lip. I didn't mean to offend. No offense taken, he assured her, his expression growing more serious. As for why I advertised, there aren't many unmarried women in these parts. I've built a good ranch, a good home, but it's empty. I wanted someone to share it with. He paused. I should warn you, though, ranch life isn't easy, especially for someone used to city comforts. I wasn't raised with many comforts, Mr. Clayton, Ruby said quietly, and I'm not afraid of hard work. He nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer. We'll be home soon. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in gold and crimson, Ruby caught her first glimpse of what would be her new home. The ranch was nestled in a small valley, with a sturdy two-story house built of stone and timber. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, and a corral held several horses. It wasn't grand, but it was well-maintained and far more substantial than Ruby had expected. This is all yours, she asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Ours now, Clayton corrected. If you decide to stay. Ruby turned to him, confused. What do you mean? Of course I'm staying. The arrangement can be undone, Clayton said firmly. I won't hold you to anything if you're not happy here, Ruby. I want a wife, not a prisoner. Before Ruby could respond, they pulled up to the house. A young boy of about 12 ran out to greet them. Mr. Clay, you're back. He skidded to a stop when he saw Ruby. Who's that? Daniel, this is Miss Ruby Dawson, Clayton said. Ruby, this is Daniel Martinez. He helps around the ranch and lives in the bunkhouse with the other hands. Hello, Daniel, Ruby said, smiling at the boy. Daniel gaped at her bruises but quickly remembered his manners. Nice to meet you, miss. Daniel, tell Rosita we're home and have her prepare the guest room, Clayton instructed, helping Ruby down from the wagon. Guest room. Daniel looked confused. But ain't she the guest room, Daniel? Clayton repeated firmly. As Daniel ran off, Ruby looked questioningly at Clayton. Resita is our housekeeper, he explained. She and her husband, Miguel, have been with me since I started the ranch. They live in a small house behind this one. And the guest room? Ruby asked carefully. Clayton met her gaze directly. I meant what I said, Ruby. You're not obligated to marry me just because you've arrived. You'll have your own room, your own space. We'll take time to get to know each other. If after a while you decide this isn't what you want, I'll pay for your passage to wherever you want to go. Ruby was speechless. This was nothing like what she had expected, nothing like the cold business arrangement her stepfather had mocked her for accepting. Clayton Keller was offering her a choice, something she'd rarely been given in her life. Why would you do that? She finally asked. Clayton's expression was serious as he picked up her valise. Because a marriage should be a partnership, not a purchase. Come on, let me show you the house. Ruby followed him up the porch steps, wondering if perhaps she had found not just safety in the Arizona territory, but something she'd never dared hope for: respect. The interior of the ranch house surprised Ruby. She had expected something sparse and purely functional, but Clayton's home was well furnished and thoughtfully arranged. The main room held sturdy, comfortable furniture. Bookshelves lined one wall, and colorful woven rugs brightened the wooden floors. It was undeniably masculine, but far from crude. It's lovely, she said sincerely. Resita's influence, Clayton admitted. Left to my own devices, I'd probably just have a chair and a bed. A middle-aged Mexican woman emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her warm brown eyes widened at the sight of Ruby. "Senor Clayton, you did not tell me we would have a guest," she exclaimed before noticing Ruby's injuries. Her expression softened immediately. "I, Pa Resita." "Resita, this is Miss Ruby Dawson," Clayton said. "Ruby, this is Resita Mendez, the woman who keeps this place and me from falling apart." Resita smiled kindly at Ruby. "Welcome, Miss Dawson. I have prepared the guest room as Daniel said. Are you hungry? I can make something quickly." "That would be wonderful, Resita. Thank you," Clayton answered for both of them. "We'll get Ruby settled first." He led Ruby upstairs to a pleasant bedroom with a window overlooking the mountains. A large bed with a handmade quilt dominated the space, and there was a dresser, a small writing desk, and a rocking chair by the window. "The washroom is across the hall," Clayton explained. "There's indoor plumbing, a luxury out here, but worth every penny. I'll have Daniel bring up hot water if you'd like to wash up before dinner." Ruby ran her fingers over the quilt, overwhelmed by the day's events. "This is more than I expected," she admitted. Clayton set her valise down. "What did you expect?" She hesitated. "Something smaller. Less established. Your letters didn't indicate." She gestured around the room. "I found it's better to underpromise and overdeliver," he said with a slight smile. "I'll let you get settled. Dinner will be ready soon." After he left, Ruby sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything. The man she had traveled across the country to marry was nothing like she had imagined. She had prepared herself for someone crude, possibly harsh, someone she would have to learn to tolerate for the sake of escaping her stepfather's brutality. Instead, she had found a man who seemed genuinely kind, offering her a choice when she had expected none. Daniel brought up hot water, and Ruby gratefully washed away the dust of her journey. She changed into one of her few decent dresses, wishing she had something nicer to wear for her first dinner in her new home. The bruises on her face were still painfully visible, and she touched them gently, wincing when she came downstairs. Clayton was waiting in the main room, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt. His eyes warmed at the sight of her. "Feeling better?" he asked. Much, thank you, she replied. Your home is truly lovely. It's taken 8 years to build it to what it is now, he said. I came here with barely enough money for the land, built the house myself with Miguel's help, started with just a few cattle and worked up from there. You should be proud, Ruby said sincerely. Something flickered in Clayton's eyes, appreciation for her understanding, perhaps. Dinner should be ready. Rosita is probably the best cook in the territory, so you're in for a treat. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the sense of spices Ruby didn't recognize. A large wooden table dominated the space, set for 2. Rosita busied herself at the stove, turning when they entered. Sit, sit, she urged. I have made a special meal to welcome Miss Dawson. The food was indeed delicious, tender beef in a rich sauce, beans unlike any Ruby had tasted before, and warm tortillas that Rosita taught her to use to scoop up the food. There was fresh bread as well, and for dessert, a sweet custard that melted on Ruby's tongue. This is wonderful, she told Rosita. I've never had food like this before. Rosita beamed with pride. Mexican food. Much better than American, Clayton laughed. Don't let Mrs. Bennett hear you say that. She's very proud of her apple pie. The easy banter between Clayton and Rosita spoke of years of comfortable familiarity. Ruby found herself relaxing for the first time in months, perhaps years. The fear that had been her constant companion since agreeing to become a mail-order bride began to recede slightly. After dinner, Clayton suggested they sit on the porch. The night was cool, a welcome relief after the day's heat. Stars blazed overhead in greater numbers than Ruby had ever seen, and the silhouettes of the mountains created a dramatic backdrop. It's so quiet, she whispered, as if speaking normally would somehow break the spell of the night. One of the things I love most about it here, Clayton said. In town, there's always some noise, people arguing, horses, the saloon piano. Out here, sometimes all you can hear is the wind. They sat in companionable silence for a while, rocking gently in the porch chairs. Will you tell me, Clayton finally asked, his voice gentle, about the Bruises? Ruby's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. She had known this conversation would come eventually. My mother died when I was 15, she began quietly. My father had passed years before, my stepfather. He had always been strict, but after Mother died, he became cruel. He drank, and when he drank, She trailed off. He hit you, Clayton supplied, his voice carefully controlled. Ruby nodded. At first, it was just when he was very drunk. Then it became more frequent. When I saw your advertisement in the paper, I thought it was my chance to escape. She gave a humorless laugh. He was furious when I told him, said no decent man would want me. That I'd end up with someone worse than him. Clayton's knuckles were white where he gripped his chair. The Bruises you arrived with, a parting gift, Ruby said bitterly. To remind me of what would await me if I came crawling back. You won't be going back, Clayton said with quiet certainty. No, Ruby agreed. I won't. Clayton seemed to be struggling with something. Finally, he asked, did he? Was there worse than the hitting? Ruby understood what he was asking. No, she said quickly. Not that. He was cruel, but not in that way. Clayton nodded, visible relief crossing his features. Good, that's good. He paused. I want you to know, Ruby, that I've never raised my hand to a woman. I never will. I believe you, Ruby said softly, and was surprised to realize she meant it. They fell silent again, listening to the night sounds, the distant howl of a coyote, the chirping of crickets, the soft nickering of horses in the corral. What about you? Ruby finally asked. Your letters told me about the ranch, but little about yourself. Clayton shifted in his chair. Not much to tell. I grew up in Texas. My father was a rancher there, learned the business from him, came out here after the war looking for a fresh start. You fought in the war? Ruby asked. Confederate side, Clayton admitted. Not by choice. Texas seceded and able-bodied men were expected to serve. I was 16 when I enlisted, too young to know better. You were just a boy, Ruby said softly. Old enough to carry a rifle, Clayton replied grimly. Old enough to see things no one should see. He shook his head as if to dispel the memories. After it ended, I couldn't stay in Texas. Too many ghosts. Worked my way west, saved every penny, bought this land in '72 and have been building it up ever since. No family, Ruby asked carefully. Lost my mother when I was young like you. Father passed during the war, had a brother older, lost him at Gettysburg. Clayton's voice was matter of fact, but Ruby could hear the pain beneath. What about you? Any siblings? Ruby shook her head. Just me. My mother was the only family I really had. Clayton nodded, understanding in his eyes. They were both orphans in their own way, both alone in the world. It's getting late, he said eventually. You must be exhausted after your journey. Indeed, Ruby was struggling to keep her eyes open. The events of the day, coming after weeks of travel, had drained her completely. A little, she admitted. Clayton stood, offering her his hand to help her rise. His palm was rough with calluses but gentle against her skin. We'll talk more tomorrow. I'd like to show you around the ranch if you're feeling up to it. I'd like that, Ruby said. He walked her to her room, stopping at the door. If you need anything, my room is at the end of the hall. Rosita comes early to start breakfast, usually around sunrise. Thank you, Clayton. For everything. He smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. Sleep well, Ruby. As she prepared for bed, Ruby found herself thinking about the man who was to be her husband. He wasn't what she had expected. He was better, kinder. But there was a sadness in him, a loneliness she recognized because it mirrored her own. Perhaps they could heal each other, she thought as she drifted off to sleep. Perhaps they could build something good together, something neither of them had known before. The nightmare came as Ruby knew it would. It always did when she slept in a new place. She was back in her stepfather's house, cowering as he loomed over her, belt in hand, face contorted with drunken rage. She could smell the whiskey on his breath, feel the sting of leather against her skin. Ruby woke with a strangled cry, disoriented in the unfamiliar darkness. For a terrifying moment, she thought she was back in Boston, that her escape had been the dream. Then slowly, the room came into focus, the moonlight streaming through the window, the unfamiliar shapes of furniture, the distant sound of a horse nickering. Arizona. She was in Arizona on Clayton Keller's ranch. A soft knock came at her door. Ruby, are you all right? Clayton's voice was low, concerned. Ruby swallowed hard. Yes, I'm sorry if I disturbed you. There was a pause. May I come in? Ruby hesitated, then reached for her shawl, wrapping it around her nightdress. Yes, the door opened slowly. Clayton stood there in trousers and an undershirt, his hair tousled from sleep. He carried a lamp that cast a warm glow over his worried features. Nightmare? He asked gently. Ruby nodded, embarrassed. I didn't mean to wake you. I'm a light sleeper. Clayton remained in the doorway, respectfully not entering further without invitation. Can I get you anything? Water, or Rosita makes a tea that helps with sleep. No, thank you, I'll be fine. Ruby drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. This happens sometimes. It will pass. Clayton nodded, understanding in his eyes. I know about nightmares. Had my share after the war. He paused. Would you like me to stay until you fall asleep? Just sitting in the chair there, he added hastily, pointing to the rocking chair by the window. Ruby was about to refuse, to insist she was fine, but something in his expression stopped her. There was no pity there, only genuine concern and perhaps recognition of a shared pain. Yes, she said softly. I think I'd like that. Clayton moved to the chair, setting the lamp on the small table beside it. He sat down, his large frame making the rocking chair seem smaller. "Try to sleep," he said. "I'll be right here." Ruby lay back down, pulling the quilt up. The presence of another person, someone who meant her no harm, was strangely comforting. She closed her eyes, listening to the gentle creak of the rocking chair. "My brother had nightmares too," Clayton said quietly. "After his first battle, he'd wake up shouting, thinking he was still on the battlefield." "What did you do?" Ruby asked, her eyes still closed, sat with him like this. "Sometimes told stories about when we were boys, anything to pull his mind back to the present." "Did it help sometimes?" Clayton admitted. "Not always, but he said knowing someone was there made it easier to fall back asleep." Ruby murmured agreement, already feeling herself drifting. There was something deeply comforting about Clayton's presence, solid and protective without being threatening. She wasn't sure how much time had passed when she heard him rise quietly from the chair. Half asleep, she felt him gently adjust the quilt over her shoulders. "Sleep well, Ruby," he whispered, and then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. For the first time in years, Ruby slept without further nightmares. Morning brought the sense of coffee and frying bacon drifting up to Ruby's room. She dressed quickly in one of her plainer dresses, suitable for a day at the ranch, and made her way downstairs. Rosita was bustling around the kitchen, and Clayton was already seated at the table, a cup of coffee in front of him. "Good morning," he greeted her, rising slightly when she entered. "Did you sleep well?" "After?" "Yes, thank you," Ruby said, grateful that he didn't mention her nightmare in front of Rosita. "Better than I have in quite some time." Clayton nodded, seemingly pleased. "I thought I'd show you around the ranch today, introduce you to everyone, unless you'd prefer to rest after your journey." "I'd like to see everything," Ruby assured him, accepting the cup of coffee Rosita offered. Breakfast was hearty eggs, bacon, beans, and fresh tortillas. Ruby found herself genuinely hungry for the first time in days. "You have a good appetite," Rosita approved. "Too skinny. We will fix that." After breakfast, Clayton took Ruby on a tour of the ranch. The morning air was cool but promised heat later in the day. The ranch was larger than Ruby had initially realized, with several pastures, a sturdy barn, bunkhouse, storage sheds, and corrals. A creek ran along one edge of the property, providing water for the cattle and horses. "I've got about 500 head of cattle now," Clayton explained as they walked. "Started with just 50. Breed them and drive them to the railroad at Tucson twice a year." "It's impressive," Ruby said sincerely. "You've built something substantial here." Clayton's face showed quiet pride. "It's been hard work, but worth it." They approached the corral where several cowboys were working with horses. The men stopped what they were doing when they noticed Clayton and Ruby approaching. "Boys, this is Miss Ruby Dawson," Clayton announced. "Ruby, these are my ranch hands." He introduced them one by one: Miguel, Rosita's husband and his foreman, brothers Jake and Thomas Wilson, an older man everyone called Pops, and a young half-Apache man named Samuel. Each man tipped his hat respectfully to Ruby, though she noticed their curious glances at her fading bruises. "Miss Dawson has come from Boston to be my wife," Clayton continued, his tone matter-of-fact but with an undercurrent that suggested no questions would be welcomed about her appearance. The men murmured congratulations, and Miguel stepped forward with a warm smile. "Welcome to Keller Ranch, Miss Dawson. Rosita has been very excited since she heard you were coming." "Thank you," Ruby said. "Everyone has been very kind." As they continued their tour, Clayton explained the workings of the ranch, the rhythm of the seasons, the cattle drives, the constant work of maintaining fences, caring for livestock, and managing the land. "It never stops," he admitted. "There's always something that needs doing." "It sounds fulfilling," Ruby observed. creating something, watching it grow. Clayton glanced at her, seeming surprised by her understanding. Yes, exactly. Most city folks just see the dirt and the hard work. I'm not most city folks, Ruby reminded him with a small smile. And Boston may be a city, but I spent most of my time working, not enjoying its amenities. What kind of work did you do? Clayton asked. I was a seamstress in a dress shop, Ruby explained. Before that, I helped my mother with her laundry business. I've been earning my keep since I was 12. Clayton nodded thoughtfully. That explains your hands. Ruby looked down at her hands, not delicate ladies' hands, but those of someone who had worked hard her whole life. She'd been self-conscious about them when she first arrived, afraid they would disappoint him. They're good hands, Clayton said, as if reading her thoughts. Capable hands. The simple compliment warmed Ruby more than any flowery praise could have. They reached a small rise overlooking the property. Clayton stopped, allowing Ruby to take in the view the ranch buildings below them, cattle grazing in the distance, mountains rising majestically on the horizon. What do you think? He asked. Could you be happy here? Ruby looked out at the vast landscape, so different from the cramped city streets she had known. There was a freedom here, a sense of possibility that she had never felt before. I think I could, she said honestly. It's beautiful in its own way. Clayton seemed pleased with her answer. It can be hard, he warned. Winters can be harsh, summers brutally hot. Sometimes there's drought, sometimes flash floods. The land tests you. Life tests everyone, Ruby replied simply. At least here the challenges come from nature, not people's cruelty. Clayton studied her face, something like admiration in his eyes. You're stronger than you look, Ruby Dawson. I had to be, she said without self-pity. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, looking out over the ranch. Then Clayton cleared his throat. There's something we should discuss. Ruby tensed slightly, wondering what was coming. The Reverend will be expecting us to set a date, Clayton said carefully. People in town saw you arrive yesterday. They'll be expecting a wedding. I see, Ruby said, trying to keep her voice steady. Despite Clayton's kindness, the reality of her situation remained. She had come here to be his wife, not his guest. But I meant what I said yesterday, Clayton continued. I won't rush you. If you need time or if you decide this isn't what you want. What do you want, Clayton? Ruby asked directly, turning to face him. He seemed taken aback by the question. I want you to be comfortable, to feel safe. That's not what I asked, Ruby pressed gently. Why did you send for a bride? What are you looking for? Clayton removed his hat, running a hand through his hair as he considered her question. Companionship, he finally said. A partner, someone to share this with. He gestured to the ranch spread out below them. Someone to build a life with. And children. Ruby asked, her cheeks warming at her boldness. Eventually, yes, Clayton admitted. If that's what you want too. Ruby nodded, appreciating his honesty. I've always wanted a family, she said softly. A real family with love and respect. Something passed between them, then a moment of understanding, of shared hope. We could set the date for 2 weeks from now, Ruby suggested. That would give us time to know each other better and for she gestured to her face, to heal completely. Relief crossed Clayton's features. 2 weeks sounds good. We can ride into town tomorrow to speak with Reverend Phillips if you'd like. I would, Ruby agreed. As they walked back toward the house, Ruby felt a strange new sensation, a cautious optimism she hadn't experienced in years. Clayton Keller wasn't the husband she had expected, but perhaps he was the one she needed. Someone who understood hardship and survival, who valued strength and honesty over superficial qualities. There's one more thing I'd like to show you, Clayton said as they approached the house. He led her around to the back, where a small fenced area contained a carefully tended garden. Rosita's pride and joy, he explained. She grows vegetables, herbs, some flowers. I thought, maybe you'd enjoy working with her here if you like gardening." Ruby touched a bright red tomato hanging heavily from its vine. "I've never had the chance to garden before," she admitted, "but I'd like to learn." "Rosita would be thrilled to teach you," Clayton said. "She's been hoping for another woman around the place." "Gets tired of just men to talk to, I think." Ruby smiled at the thought. "It would be nice to have a friend." "You'll have more than that," Clayton promised. "Once people in town get to know you, you'll be welcomed. It's a small community, everyone looks out for each other." As they returned to the house for the midday meal, Ruby felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time, the stirring of hope, like a small flame that might, with careful tending, grow into something warm and sustaining. Perhaps here, in this harsh but beautiful land, with this quiet, honorable man, she could find not just safety but happiness. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Ruby settled into life at the Keller ranch. True to his word, Clayton took her into Fort McDowell the day after her arrival to speak with Reverend Phillips, a kindly older man who seemed genuinely pleased about their upcoming nuptials. "It's about time Clay found himself a bride," the Reverend had said, smiling warmly at Ruby. "The Lord doesn't intend for man to be alone." They set the date for the second Saturday following, giving them time to prepare and for word to spread to the scattered ranches and homesteads in the area. As they left the church, Ruby was startled when Clayton reached for her hand, holding it gently as they walked down the main street. "People are watching," he explained quietly. "Thought we should look like a couple." Ruby nodded, trying to ignore the pleasant warmth that spread through her at his touch. She reminded herself that this was still, at its heart, a practical arrangement regardless of Clayton's kindness. Their next stop was the general store, where Mrs. Bennet greeted them enthusiastically. "Here comes the happy couple, my Miss Dawson. You're looking better already." It was true the bruises on Ruby's face were fading to yellowish green, much less noticeable than when she'd arrived. "Mrs. Bennet, Ruby needs fabric for a wedding dress," Clayton said. "And anything else for the ceremony and after." He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable discussing such matters. The older woman's eyes lit up. "Of course. Come with me, dear. I just received some beautiful white cotton that would be perfect." She drew Ruby toward the fabric section, leaving Clayton looking relieved to be excluded from the feminine discussion. As Mrs. Bennet helped Ruby select fabric, ribbons, and notions, she kept up a steady stream of conversation, much of it centered on Clayton. "He's a good man, you know," she confided as she measured out yards of soft white fabric. "One of the best in the territory. Honest to a fault, works harder than any 3 men and never turns away someone in need." "He's been very kind to me," Ruby acknowledged. "Kind, yes, but there's more to Clay Keller than just kindness," Mrs. Bennet said, lowering her voice. 2 winters ago, when the Wilsons' farm failed and they couldn't feed their children, Clay hired Jake and Thomas even though he didn't really need more hands. Last year, when young Samuel, he's half Apache, was being harassed by some of the more prejudiced elements in town, Clay stood up for him, gave him a job and a home. Ruby listened, absorbing these stories that revealed the character of the man she was to marry. "He doesn't talk about these things," she observed. "Of course not," Mrs. Bennet said with a fond smile. "Clay's not one to boast about doing what he considers right, but I thought you should know what kind of man you're getting." By the time they finished shopping, Ruby had everything she needed to create a simple but pretty wedding dress, along with a few other necessities Mrs. Bennet insisted were essential for a new bride. Clayton paid without comment, though Ruby noticed the substantial amount and felt a twinge of guilt. "I could have made do with less," she said as they loaded their purchases into the wagon. "You deserve a proper wedding," Clayton said simply, "and a proper start as Mrs. Keller." The ride back to the ranch was companionable, with Clayton pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area's history. Ruby found herself relaxing in his company, enjoying his deep voice and occasional dry humor. Over the following days, Ruby fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose early with Clayton and Reseda, helped with breakfast, and then spent her mornings sewing her wedding dress while Reseda taught her to make tortillas and other Mexican dishes. In the afternoons, she often worked in the garden with Reseda or accompanied Clayton on rides around the property, learning the boundaries and features of what would soon be her home. The ranch hands were respectful but friendly, especially young Daniel, who seemed fascinated by Ruby's stories of Boston. Miguel treated her with a fatherly kindness that reminded her of better times before her real father had died. Even Pops, the taciturn older cowboy, would tip his hat and offer a gruff "Mornin', Miss Dawson" when they crossed paths. Ruby's bruises faded more each day, as did her fear. Clayton never pressed her for details about her past, never made her feel like a burden or an obligation. In the evenings, they would often sit on the porch, talking about their days, sharing pieces of their histories, or sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence as the stars appeared overhead. It was during one of these evening conversations, 4 days before the wedding, that Clayton brought up a subject they had both been carefully avoiding. "After we're married," he began, his voice measured, "you'll move into the main bedroom with me. Unless you'd prefer to keep separate rooms for a while." Ruby felt heat rise to her cheeks. I understand the duties of a wife, Clayton." "They're not duties," he said firmly. "Not with me. I would never expect you to. That is, I wouldn't want you to feel obligated." Ruby looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap. I haven't." "I know," Clayton said gently, "and we'll take things as slowly as you need. I just wanted you to know that." Ruby nodded, grateful for his understanding but still embarrassed by the conversation. In Boston, her mother had given her only the vaguest explanation of what happened between a husband and wife, and her stepfather's crude comments had only confused and frightened her more. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured after a moment. "Of course. Have there been other women since you've been here?" she rushed on before he could answer. "I don't mean to pry, but in town, Mrs. Bennett mentioned that several local women had set their caps for you over the years." Clayton's lips quirked in a half-smile. "Martha Bennett enjoys gossip a bit too much," he sighed. "There have been opportunities, yes, but nothing serious, nothing lasting." "Why not?" Ruby pressed, genuinely curious. Clayton was silent for a long moment, considering his answer. "After the war I wasn't whole," he finally said. "Had too many dark memories, too many nightmares. Didn't think I had any right to burden someone else with all that. And then, as the ranch grew, there was always too much work, too little time." He paused. "But mostly I never met anyone I could imagine sharing my life with, not until I read your letters." Ruby was startled. "My letters?" "But they were so practical. I hardly revealed anything of myself." "It wasn't what you wrote," Clayton explained. "It was how you wrote it. Clear-eyed, honest. No false flattery or desperate pleading like some of the other responses I received. You wrote like a woman who knew her own worth, who was offering a fair exchange your companionship for my protection and provision." "That's exactly what I was doing," Ruby admitted. "I know, and I respected that." Clayton turned to look at her directly. "But now that you're here, now that I've met you, I want more than just a practical arrangement, Ruby. I want us to build something real." The intensity in his blue eyes made Ruby's heart quicken. "I want that too," she whispered. For a moment it seemed he might reach for her hand or perhaps even kiss her. But then Daniel came running up to the porch, breaking the moment. "Mr. Clay, One of the new calves got through the fence. Miguel says he needs your help. Clayton stood immediately. I'll be right there. He looked down at Ruby apologetically. Ranch life. Always something. Go, she said with a smile. I'll be here. As she watched him stride away with Daniel, Ruby realized with sudden clarity that her feelings for Clayton Keller had progressed beyond gratitude or relief. She was beginning to care for him not just as her protector or future husband, but as a man. The realization both thrilled and frightened her. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Ruby stood at her bedroom window, watching the golden light spread across the mountains. Today she would become Mrs. Clayton Keller, a name and identity so different from the one she had left behind in Boston. There was a soft knock at her door, and Resita entered, her arms full of wildflowers. For your hair and for a bouquet, she explained. It is tradition. They're beautiful, Ruby said, touching the delicate blooms. Resita set to work helping Ruby dress and arranging her hair in an elegant style adorned with the smallest wildflowers. When she was finished, she stepped back to admire her work. My hermosa, she declared. Very beautiful. Senor Clayton will not be able to take his eyes from you. Ruby blushed, looking at her reflection in the small mirror. The dress she had made was simple but elegant white cotton with delicate lace trim she had salvaged from one of her better Boston dresses. Her face was completely healed now, no trace remaining of the bruises that had marked her arrival. I never thought I'd have this, she admitted softly. A real wedding day with a dress and flowers. Resita squeezed her shoulder gently. You deserve happiness, Nina. And Senor Clayton, he deserves it too. You will be good for each other, I think. The ceremony was to take place at the small church in Fort McDowell, followed by a celebration at the town's only restaurant, which had been closed to regular customers for the occasion. Clayton had insisted on doing things properly, wanting Ruby to feel honored as his bride. Miguel drove Ruby to town in the wagon, while Clayton had ridden ahead earlier to make final arrangements. Ruby sat silently beside the foreman, clutching her wildflower bouquet, her stomach fluttering with nerves. Senor Clayton is a good man, Miguel said suddenly, breaking the companionable silence. He saved me and Resita, you know, after our farm failed, gave us work, a home, respect. He glanced at Ruby. He will be a good husband. I believe he will, Ruby said softly. And you, Miguel continued, you have brought light back to his eyes. For many years he has worked, built the ranch, been fair to all, but there was always something missing. Now he smiles more. Laughs sometimes. Ruby hadn't realized the impact her presence had made. I've only been here 2 weeks. Sometimes that is all it takes, Miguel said with a shrug, when the right person comes. When they reached the church, Ruby was surprised to see how many people had gathered. It seemed the entire town had turned out, along with families from neighboring ranches and farms. Mrs. Bennett rushed forward to help Ruby from the wagon, exclaiming over her dress and hair. You look absolutely lovely, dear. Clay won't know what hit him. Inside, the small church was decorated with more wildflowers and ribbons. Ruby paused in the doorway, suddenly overwhelmed. This was really happening. She was about to bind herself to a man she had known for only 2 weeks. Yet as she looked down the aisle and saw Clayton waiting by the altar, handsome in a new black suit, his expression a mixture of awe and tenderness as he caught sight of her, all doubts fled. There was a rightness to this moment that transcended the unusual circumstances of their meeting. With no father or male relative to give her away, Ruby had expected to walk down the aisle alone. But as she hesitated at the entrance, Daniel appeared at her side, dressed in his Sunday best, his hair slicked down with water. Mr. Clay asked if I'd walk you down the aisle, Miss Ruby, he said shyly. If that's all right with you. Tears pricked at Ruby's eyes. "I'd be honored, Daniel." The boy offered his arm with all the dignity of someone twice his age, and Ruby placed her hand on it gently. Together, they proceeded down the aisle as someone played a simple tune on the church's small organ. Clayton's eyes never left her face as she approached. When she reached him, he extended his hand, and Ruby placed hers in his larger one, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip. "You're beautiful," he whispered, so only she could hear. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Reverend Philip spoke of the sacred bond between husband and wife, of mutual respect and care, of building a life together founded on love and trust. When it came time for the vows, Clayton's voice was steady and sure as he promised to cherish and protect Ruby for all his days. When her turn came, Ruby was surprised by the emotion that welled up as she spoke the traditional words. This was more than an escape, more than a practical arrangement. Somehow, in the span of 2 short weeks, it had become a genuine beginning. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Phillips declared. "Mr. Keller, you may kiss your bride." Clayton hesitated, seeming unsure how Ruby would feel about a public display. But Ruby smiled encouragingly, and he leaned down, pressing his lips gently to hers in a kiss that was brief but tender. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause as they turned to face them as husband and wife. Ruby felt a happiness she had never expected, a sense of belonging, of coming home. The celebration afterward was lively, with food, music, and dancing. Everyone wanted to congratulate the new couple and welcome Ruby to the community. Women who had been strangers 2 weeks ago now embraced her warmly, offering friendship and advice for ranch life. Men clapped Clayton on the back, some teasing him good-naturedly about finally being caught. "Mrs. Keller," Clayton said later as they shared a dance. "How does it sound?" "Wonderful," Ruby admitted. "Better than I ever imagined." His arms tightened slightly around her. "I'm going to do everything in my power to make you happy, Ruby. I want you to know that." "You already have," she said honestly. "You've given me safety, respect, a home. That's more than I dared hope for." Clayton's expression grew serious. "I want to give you more than that, much more." As the celebration continued into the evening, Ruby found herself growing both nervous and expectant about what was to come. Tonight would be their first as husband and wife, their first sharing a bedroom, a bed. The sun was setting when they finally took their leave, amid good-natured teasing and well wishes. Clayton helped Ruby into the wagon, and they set off for the ranch, their home now, truly shared. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the cooling evening air a relief after the warmth of the crowded restaurant. Ruby watched the landscape turn golden in the setting sun, marveling at how quickly this place had come to feel like home. "Are you happy, Ruby?" Clayton asked suddenly, his gaze still on the road ahead. "Yes," she said simply. "Are you?" He glanced at her, a smile warming his features. "More than I thought possible." When they reached the ranch, Clayton surprised Ruby by lifting her from the wagon and carrying her across the threshold of the house. She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Is this necessary?" "Absolutely," he said with mock solemnity. "Tradition." Inside, they found the main room lit with candles, a bottle of wine and 2 glasses set out on the small table. Resita had clearly prepared for their return. "She thinks of everything," Ruby said with a smile. "She's been planning this since the day you arrived," Clayton admitted, setting Ruby gently on her feet. "I think she was beginning to give up hope of me ever marrying." He poured wine for both of them, then raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," Ruby echoed, sipping the sweet red wine. A comfortable silence fell between them, charged with anticipation and a touch of nervousness. Ruby knew what was expected on a wedding night, but her knowledge was vague, colored by fear rather than understanding. Clayton seemed to sense her unease. "We can just talk if you'd prefer," he offered. "Or I could sleep in the guest room tonight." Ruby shook her head. "No, I want to be your wife in every way." She met his gaze directly. "I'm just not sure what to do." Clayton set down his glass and moved closer, taking her hands in his. "We'll figure it out together," he promised. "And Ruby, if at any point you want to stop, just say so. I meant what I said before. There are no duties here, only choices." His consideration nearly brought tears to her eyes. How different he was from what she had feared, from the man her stepfather had predicted would be worse than him. Clayton brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch feather light. "May I kiss you? Properly this time, without the entire town watching." Ruby nodded, her heart racing as he leaned down. His lips met hers gently at first, a question rather than a demand. When she responded, lifting her hands to his shoulders, the kiss deepened, becoming something warm and sweet and surprising. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Clayton rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day you arrived," he admitted. "Even with my bruised face?" Ruby asked, half joking. "Even then," he confirmed. "You were the bravest woman I'd ever seen, traveling all that way alone, starting over with nothing but hope." He kissed her again, and this time Ruby felt something new stirring within her, not just affection or gratitude, but desire. This was nothing like the fear she had anticipated. Clayton's touch was gentle but stirring, his evident restraint making her feel safe even as the kiss intensified. When he drew back, his eyes had darkened, but he maintained his control. "Should we go upstairs?" he asked, his voice slightly rough. Ruby nodded, suddenly unable to speak. Clayton took her hand, leading her up the stairs to the main bedroom, his bedroom until now, theirs from this night forward. The room was larger than the guest room where Ruby had slept, with a massive 4-poster bed dominating the space. Like the rest of the house, it was simply but comfortably furnished, with a large wardrobe, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. Someone, Resita, undoubtedly had turned down the bed and placed more wildflowers in a vase on the bedside table. "I had Miguel move your things in earlier today," Clayton explained, gesturing to the dresser where Ruby could see some of her personal items arranged. "If you'd like to change or prepare yourself." Ruby appreciated his consideration. "I'll just be a moment," she said, gathering her nightdress and robe from where they had been laid out. In the privacy of the adjoining washroom, Ruby changed quickly, her fingers fumbling with the buttons of her wedding dress. She brushed out her hair, washed her face, and took several deep breaths to calm her racing heart. This was Clayton, she reminded herself. Clayton, who had been nothing but gentle and respectful, who had promised her safety and kept that promise. When she returned to the bedroom, Clayton had removed his jacket and vest and was in the process of unbuttoning his shirt. He paused when she entered, his eyes taking in her appearance with evident appreciation. "You are so beautiful," he said quietly. Ruby blushed, unused to such compliments. "So are you," she admitted shyly. Clayton's surprised laugh broke the tension. "I don't think anyone's ever called me beautiful before." "Handsome, then," Ruby corrected with a small smile. Clayton crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Ruby, I want you to know something. I didn't just marry you because I needed a wife or because I was lonely. These past 2 weeks, getting to know you, I've come to care for you deeply. I think in time it could become something more." Ruby's heart swelled at his words. "I feel the same," she whispered. "I never expected to find someone like you. Never thought I could feel this way." The kiss that followed was deeper, more urgent than those they had shared before. Ruby felt herself responding instinctively, her body arching toward his as his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. What followed was a gentle initiation into the mysteries of marriage. Clayton was patient and tender, guiding but never pushing, always attentive to her responses. There was discomfort, as Ruby had been told to expect, but it was brief and overshadowed by the growing pleasure of their connection. Afterward, lying in Clayton's arms, her head resting on his chest as he stroked her hair, Ruby felt a contentment she had never known before. This was what it meant to be truly safe, truly valued, not just protected but cherished. "Are you all right?" Clayton asked softly, his hand continuing its gentle caress. "More than all right," Ruby assured him. "I never knew it could be like that." Clayton pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "It gets better," he promised, "as we learn each other." Ruby traced lazy patterns on his chest, marveling at the intimacy they now shared. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For being the man you are, for not being what I feared." Clayton's arms tightened around her. "I will never give you reason to fear me, Ruby. Never." Ruby believed him completely. As she drifted toward sleep in the safety of her husband's embrace, she thought of the bruises that had marked her arrival, the last she would ever bear, just as Clayton had promised. In their place, she now wore his ring, his name, and the first tendrils of a love she had never expected to find. The next morning, Ruby woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and the unfamiliar but pleasant sensation of Clayton's arm draped protectively across her waist. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, savoring the feeling of security and belonging. Clayton stirred beside her, his arm tightening slightly before he opened his eyes. When he saw her watching him, a slow smile spread across his face. "Good morning, Mrs. Keller," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," Ruby replied, unable to keep from smiling in return. Clayton reached out to touch her cheek gently. "No regrets, none," she assured him. They might have lingered longer, but a rooster crowed insistently, reminding them that ranch life didn't pause even for newlyweds. Clayton sighed. "Duty calls. The cattle don't feed themselves." "And I promised to help Reseda with breakfast," Ruby said, reluctantly sitting up. As they dressed and prepared for the day, there was a new ease between them, a comfortable intimacy born of their night together. Clayton stole kisses as they moved around the room, and Ruby found herself responding with a playfulness she hadn't known she possessed. Downstairs, Reseda greeted them with knowing eyes and a wide smile. "Buenos dias to the happy couple," she said, setting plates of eggs and tortillas before them. "Did you sleep well?" Ruby blushed furiously, but Clayton merely winked at the housekeeper. "Very well, thank you, Reseda." The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Ruby settled into her role as mistress of the ranch house, working alongside Reseda in the kitchen and garden, gradually taking on more responsibilities as she learned. Clayton taught her to ride properly, not side saddle as she had occasionally done in Boston, but astride like the ranch women did. He showed her the boundaries of their property, the best fishing spots along the creek, the wild apple trees that would bear fruit in the fall. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch together, talking about their days or their hopes for the future. Sometimes Clayton would read aloud from one of his books. He had quite a collection, another surprise Ruby had discovered about her husband. Other nights, they would simply enjoy the spectacular sunset and the emerging stars, comfortable in each other's company. And at night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they continued to explore the physical aspect of their marriage, growing more confident and attuned to each other with each passing day. Ruby discovered that Clayton had been right. It did get better as they learned each other's bodies, each other's desires. It wasn't all perfect, of course. They had their disagreements, their misunderstandings. Clayton could be stubborn, and Ruby sometimes found herself frustrated by his protectiveness, which occasionally veered into overprotection. But they learned to talk through their differences, to compromise and understand each other's perspectives. 3 months after their wedding, as summer's heat began to give way to the milder temperatures of early fall, Ruby made a discovery that would change their lives forever. She had been feeling unusually tired for several weeks, occasionally nauseated in the mornings. At first, she attributed it to the heat or perhaps something she had eaten. But when she missed her monthly cycle for the second time, she could no longer ignore the signs. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ruby gathered her courage. "Clayton, I have something to tell you." He turned to her, concern immediately crossing his features. "Is everything all right?" Ruby nodded, taking his hand. "Everything is perfect, but I believe I'm with child." Clayton stared at her for a long moment, his expression shifting from shock to wonder to pure joy. "A baby." "Our baby." "Yes," Ruby confirmed, her own happiness bubbling up at his reaction. "Dr. Miller confirmed it today when I went into town with Resita." Clayton let out a whoop of joy that startled a nearby horse, then dropped to his knees before her chair, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing his face gently against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one," he whispered. "Your pa can't wait to meet you." Ruby laughed, tears of happiness streaming down her face as she ran her fingers through his hair. This man who had started as a stranger, become her protector, then her husband, would now be the father of her child. It seemed impossible that so much could change in such a short time. Clayton looked up at her, his eyes shining. "I love you, Ruby Keller. I know it's fast, maybe too fast, but I do. I love you with everything I am." It was the first time he had said the words directly, though Ruby had felt his love in 100 different ways over the past months. Still, hearing them made her heart soar. "I love you too," she said softly. "I think I have almost from the beginning." He rose to kiss her then, a kiss full of promise and tenderness and shared joy. The news of Ruby's pregnancy spread quickly through the ranch and then to town. Everyone seemed genuinely happy for them, especially Resita, who immediately began knitting tiny garments and offering Ruby advice about childbearing and motherhood. As autumn progressed and Ruby's condition became more visible, Clayton grew increasingly protective. He insisted she rest more, tried to prevent her from doing any work he deemed too strenuous, and watched her like a hawk for any sign of discomfort. "Clayton," Ruby finally said one day, exasperated after he'd taken a basket of laundry from her hands, "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my women," he said stubbornly. "Not my child." Ruby softened, understanding the fear behind his protectiveness. "The baby and I are both healthy and strong," she assured him. "But if it makes you feel better, I promise to be careful and rest when I need to." Clayton nodded, somewhat appeased. "That's all I ask." As winter settled over the ranch, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain, Ruby's body continued to change, her stomach growing rounder, her movements more deliberate. Clayton watched these changes with fascination and a deep, abiding love that sometimes overwhelmed him with its intensity. At night, he would often place his hand on her growing belly, marveling at the occasional fluttering movements of their child. "Do you think it's a boy or a girl?" he would ask. "I don't know," Ruby would answer honestly. "As long as the baby is healthy, I don't mind either way." "A little girl with your hair and smile would be nice," Clayton mused one night as they lay together. "But a son would be wonderful too." "We'll have more than one," Ruby assured him, loving the way his eyes lit up at the thought. "A whole houseful if you want." "A houseful of little Rubies and Claytons," he agreed, pulling her close. "Nothing would make me happier." As Ruby's time grew nearer, Clayton arranged for a midwife from a neighboring town to stay at the ranch. Martha Wilson was experienced and competent, having delivered most of the babies in the area over the past 20 years. First babies often take their time, she told Ruby during one of her visits, but everything looks to be progressing normally. Ruby tried to stay calm as her due date approached, but she couldn't help feeling anxious. Childbirth was dangerous, she knew that. Women died, babies died. But Clayton's steady presence and unwavering confidence that all would be well helped keep her fears at bay. The baby decided to arrive during a rare spring snowstorm in early March. Ruby woke in the night to a sharp pain and the sensation of wetness. "Clayton," she gasped, shaking her husband awake. "It's time." Clayton was instantly alert, helping her through the first contraction before rushing to wake Resita and send Daniel to fetch Mrs. Wilson. The midwife arrived just as dawn was breaking, making her way through the light snow that had fallen overnight. "Well now, Mrs. Keller," she said cheerfully, examining Ruby. "Looks like you're determined to give your husband a birthday present." Ruby looked at Clayton in surprise. With the excitement of the baby's imminent arrival, she had completely forgotten the date. "It's your birthday." He nodded, looking somewhat embarrassed. Didn't seem important with everything else happening. The labor progressed steadily throughout the morning and into the afternoon. Clayton refused to leave Ruby's side, despite the midwife's insistence that men usually waited elsewhere during childbirth. He held Ruby's hand through each contraction, wiped her brow and murmured words of encouragement and love. "You're doing so well," he told her as the pains intensified. "So strong, my brave Ruby." As the sun began to set, Ruby's labor reached its peak. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, but with Clayton's support and Mrs. Wilson's calm guidance, she found strength she didn't know she possessed. "One more push," the midwife instructed. "That's it. I can see the head." With a final, monumental effort, Ruby pushed, and moments later, a thin, indignant wail filled the room. "A boy," Mrs. Wilson announced triumphantly. "A fine, healthy boy." Clayton's face was a study in wonder as the midwife quickly cleaned the infant and placed him on Ruby's chest. "Look what we made," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Look at our son." The baby was red-faced and wrinkled with a shock of dark hair like his father's. As Ruby held him close, he quieted, seeming to recognize the sound of her heartbeat, the scent of her skin. "He's perfect," she murmured, tears streaming down her face. "Absolutely perfect." Clayton sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Ruby's shoulders, the other hand gently touching his son's tiny fingers. "What shall we name him?" They had discussed names but hadn't settled on any. Now, looking at the child they had created together, Ruby knew immediately. "Matthew," she said softly. "Matthew Thomas Keller." Clayton nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "After my brother and your father. Is that all right?" "It's perfect," Clayton assured her, leaning down to kiss first his son's forehead, then his wife's lips. "Just like both of you." In the days that followed, Ruby and Clayton adjusted to life with their newborn son. Matthew proved to be a good-natured baby, with a healthy appetite and lungs that let everyone know when he was displeased. Clayton was a devoted father from the start, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Matthew when he was fussy, and watching in awe as Ruby nursed their child. "I never knew I could love someone so much," he confessed one evening as they sat together, Matthew sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside them. "Both of you. It's overwhelming sometimes." Ruby reached for his hand, understanding exactly what he meant. The love she felt for her husband and son was so vast, so all-encompassing, that it sometimes took her breath away. "We've come a long way from that day at the stagecoach," she said softly. Clayton nodded, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "When you stepped down with those bruises on your face, I wanted to find whoever had hurt you and make them pay. I never imagined then that you would become everything to me. And I never imagined I could be this happy, Ruby admitted. I came here looking for safety, for escape. I found so much more. Clayton pulled her into his arms, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. You'll never have to fear again, Ruby. Those bruises you arrived with were the last you'll ever bear. I promised you that then, and I promise it now. I know, Ruby said, resting her head against his shoulder. I've never doubted it. As spring blossomed into summer, and summer gave way to fall, the Keller family settled into the rhythm of their life together. Matthew grew strong and curious, delighting everyone on the ranch with his sunny smiles and determined crawling. Ruby thrived as both mother and rancher's wife, finding joy in creating a true home for her family. The nightmares that had once plagued her became rare, replaced by dreams of the future, more children, perhaps, watching Matthew growing old with Clayton by her side. Clayton continued to build their ranch, always with an eye toward the legacy he was creating for his son and the children who might follow. But he never let work overshadow his family, always making time to rock Matthew to sleep, to share quiet evenings with Ruby, to show her in word and deed how deeply he cherished her. On the 1-year anniversary of Ruby's arrival in Fort McDowell, Clayton surprised her with a small carved wooden box. Inside was a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. "Open it," he urged as Ruby admired the craftsmanship. Inside was a tiny portrait of Matthew on one side, and on the other, a lock of his dark baby hair. "Clayton, it's beautiful," Ruby breathed, tears filling her eyes. "But how?" "There are no photographers in Fort McDowell. I commissioned it months ago," Clayton explained. "Sent Matthew's hair and descriptions to a jeweler in Tucson. Daniel picked it up when he went with Miguel last month for supplies." Ruby was deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Will you help me put it on?" Clayton fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. "Perfect," he murmured. "Like you." That night, after Matthew was asleep in his crib, they celebrated their anniversary in the privacy of their bedroom, their passion for each other undiminished by the passing of time or the responsibilities of parenthood. Later, as they lay contentedly in each other's arms, Ruby reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a frightened young woman with bruises on her face to a confident wife and mother, beloved by a good man, secure in her home and her future. "What are you thinking about?" Clayton asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About beginnings," Ruby answered. "About how the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures if we're brave enough to take the chance." Clayton pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I thank God every day that you were brave enough to come west, to trust a stranger with your future." "And I thank God you were the man you are," Ruby replied softly. "The man who promised those bruises would be my last, and kept that promise in ways I never could have imagined." Outside their window, a coyote howled at the rising moon, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. The sounds of the Arizona night, once so foreign to Ruby, now formed the backdrop of her life, her real life, her happy life, on the ranch with the husband who had healed her heart and the son who had completed their family. As Ruby drifted toward sleep in the safety of Clayton's arms, she knew with absolute certainty that the bruises of her past had faded completely, replaced by the indelible marks of love, trust, and belonging. The mail-order bride who had arrived with Bruises had found not just safety, but joy, a joy that would sustain her through all the years to come.